we'll talk about what happened after Shiloh. So, not as well known as Shiloh is the aftermath and the siege of Corinth. How many of y'all know a little bit about the siege of Corinth, what happened after Shiloh? Anything at all? Tell me one thing that
took forever to get there.
Took forever to get there. Yep, 100% true. Took the rebels 3 days to get up there, took the Federals 30 days to get back. And the popular narrative is that, well, Halleck stopped every day and entrenched, and he was afraid, and, then when they finally took Corinth, they all died of disease because Halleck was too stupid to know that there was cholera and diseases in Corinth, and this is what I always kind of believe. Well, we're going to find that that's not quite true. And when I was down at the visitor center last summer, I bought this book by Timothy Smith. Some of y'all heard of Timothy Smith. He's got a Shiloh book, and then he's got this one that's the companion to Afterward. And this is my main source, not my only source for this, but so this is what we'll talk about. We'll talk about the immediate aftermath of Shiloh. We'll talk about the march to Corinth. We'll talk about the siege of Corinth, and then we'll kind of analyze the principles of war that both commanders maybe did well or didn't do so well. So imagine with me, you're in Shiloh, you come to Shiloh, what it looks like, and it's a mess. So, I can't really imagine it. I can't overemphasize how terrible it is. You've got open graves, you've got decaying human remains all over the battlefield. The roads are a mess because of all the rains. Can't really get supplies in from Pittsburgh Landing. Part of it's because people are going this way, people are going that way. What do we do? The Army of the Tennessee, all their tents and all their baggage are destroyed and ransacked, right? The Confederate Army comes through, they spend the night in those tents. When they get pushed back, they basically trash everything. So they have no tentage, no baggage, no nothing, no food. The Confederates took most of their food, right? So George Thomas's division still on the east side of the river. So what do? Do you evacuate the prisoners on the steamboats? Do you evacuate your wounded? Do you bring Thomas's troops over? Do you bring your baggage over? Oh, and by the way, the Army of the Ohio, when they came over, they left all their baggage on the east side of the Tennessee River, right? So you've got, 60,000 people? No food, no tents, no baggage, no nothing. And you got dead horses, dead people. It's a mess, right? An absolute mess. So in the immediate aftermath, here's kind of the organization. You've got what ends up being 6 division size elements under Grant directly. Don Carlos Buell has 5 division size elements. Thomas is still on the east side of the river. This is how it ends up. McKean, if you see, let me get my fancy schmancy fake pointer here. McKean here had taken over from Prentiss, and MacArthur took over from W.H.O. Wallace, right? Because Wallace was dead and Prentiss was captured. MacArthur had commanded Wallace's 2nd Brigade. MacArthur had been at Camp Yates, so there's a tie-in to Springfield, right? And he is no relation to Douglas MacArthur. They spell it different, so in case you're wondering. So here's Grant's idea. He plans to subsume Buell underneath his command. Him and Buell are somewhat of rivals. Promote George Thomas to a corps level. Promote Sherman to a corps level. Now, what do you notice about all 3 of these guys? What do they have in common? Where do they go to school? All West Pointers, right? So Grant definitely has a West Point bias. So he doesn't at this point hate McClernand quite yet. That'll come later. But he's not going to promote McClernand to any kind of advanced command, right? So Henry Halleck comes on April 11th. The Battle of Shiloh ended on the 7th. Now, why couldn't Halleck have come sooner? Why didn't he come sooner? Any thoughts, any theories on what was going through Halleck's head? Why did he wait 4 days to get there? And then while you're pondering that, imagine what he sees when he gets there 4 days after the battle's over. Complete chaos, complete train wreck. Right? And he says, about Ulysses S. Grant, I never saw a man more deficient in the business of organization. Brave and able in the field, he has no idea of how to regulate and organize his forces before a battle. or how to conduct the operations of a campaign. And now, Grant is starting to string victories together. Buell doesn't like it very much, right?
Was that Buell or Halleck's name?
I'm sorry, Halleck. Why did I say Buell? Halleck. It says Henry Halleck right there. I don't know why I said Buell. This guy, Henry Halleck, it says this. I mean, I think he knew that Grant was vulnerable to being attacked. So if he got defeated, I don't think Halleck wanted to be associated with that, wanted to distance himself from it. As soon as Grant wins the Battle of Shiloh, Halleck makes arrangements to get down there, right? So he can be in on that victory. Now, I don't think Halleck's as bad as everyone makes him out to be. I think Halleck would have been a great general in the War of 1812 in the Napoleonic era. He's probably not suited for Civil War combat as it ended up, but he writes the book, The Elements of Military Art and Science, which he literally writes the book on infantry tactics in the Civil War, along with Hardee he was kind of the hero of the South. And this is really a translation of a French work, but he gets the credit for it. He was in the Mexican War. He was Secretary of State in California, co-authored the first California State Constitution, married the granddaughter of Alexander Hamilton, who is Schuyler Hamilton's sister. Schuyler Hamilton was his West Point roommate. Now, does this sound familiar about marrying the sister of your West Point roommate? Who else did such a thing? Grant did that, right? Schuyler Hamilton is the grandson of Alexander Hamilton. Schuyler Hamilton is a division commander at New Madrid. So, and Schuyler Hamilton at this point happens to be Winfield Scott's aide-de-camp, or right when the war kicked off. So he had been Sherman's chief bank clerk in San Francisco. So Schuyler Hamilton has a connection to Sherman. So all these guys have these connections, and he was Halleck's roommate at West Point. He decides, I'm going to bring John Pope down. John Pope has a Springfield, Illinois connection. He had been at Camp Yates before Grant was there. He had won New Madrid, Island number 10. He wants to attack Memphis. He doesn't want to go to Shiloh. He wants to go attack Memphis. Now, why do you suppose he wants to attack Memphis instead of going to Shiloh? Any thoughts on that? These guys all had their own agendas.
He's got the Navy.
He's got the Navy, right? He's got Flag Officer Foote's boats. And he had just won Island number 10 and New Madrid, and he thinks, I am pretty big stuff, man. I shouldn't have to go, subordinate myself to Henry Halleck. I ought to be allowed to do my own thing. I want to go attack Memphis. And if I can take Memphis, I can carve out my own little independent command, and it'll make things easier to get troops where they got to go, because there's a railroad that goes from Memphis to Corinth. So he wants to attack Fort Pillow, north of Memphis. Halleck says no. Oh, by the way, tons of cotton stores in and around Memphis. Hey, what happens if you have cotton? You can make money from speculating in cotton, right? And potentially, at this point, where's Earl Van Dorn's troops? They're still on the west side of the Mississippi River. So he could have kept Van Dorn's troops, which is Sterling Price, from coming across the river, joining up with Beauregard at Corinth. So Halleck's like, no, here's what we're going to do. Grant, you're getting kicked upstairs to second in command. Second in command, and Grant hates this, right? We're going to consolidate Prentiss and Wallace's division. They've both been beat up pretty bad at the Hornet's Nest. We're going to consolidate them into one division. Move Thomas's division over to the Army of Tennessee. Promote Thomas to a corps command. Take McClernand's division, another Illinois politician, and one Army of the Ohio division, and create a reserve under McClernand. So, what do you notice about these three corps commanders? George Thomas, Don Carlos Buell, and John Pope. Where'd they all go to school? Same as the last answer. They all went to West Point, right? So Halleck's a West Pointer. His second in command's a West Pointer. McClernand, who is the political general, he commands the reserve of two divisions. He's an important political guy. He's from southern Illinois. He's from that Little Egypt region, which has some pro-southern sympathies. So we want to keep him happy, but we don't want to really put him in charge of anything important. And I'll show you where they physically were as this all commenced. So Halleck says, you can just hear him sniffing with his nose in the air. It requires a professional man to conduct a lawsuit where a few $1,000s are involved, but mere politicians can conduct armies where thousands of human lives, millions of money, and the safety of the government are involved. I'm sick and tired of military charlatans. And William Tecumseh Sherman says this reorganization is according to some French notion, right? Now, when Grant was going to make Sherman a corps commander, Sherman had no problem with that French notion. But this French notion, when he's still a division commander, and you've got, he's under George Thomas, he doesn't like that one very much. So kind of have these three armies, Army of the Tennessee, Army of the Ohio, Army of the Mississippi, that are really more like corps-size elements, 5 divisions, 4 divisions, 4 divisions, underneath the Department of the Mississippi, which is kind of acting as really an army. Now, he's got 125,000 men. The Union Army would not see 125,000 men under one commander until Grant's Overland Campaign again. So this is the biggest concentration of federal forces anywhere. At Fredericksburg, Burnside had about 120. So this is bigger than Fredericksburg. This is huge. And they're out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, there's no big cities around for them to get supplies. It's interesting. So, but Halleck and Grant were both aligned in their pro-West Point prejudice. They weren't aligned on too much else, but they were aligned on that. So here we are back at Corinth. This is a modern map of the modern military park, so you can kind of get your bearings. So Thomas is forward deployed here. Buell's forward deployed here. McClernand is back just south of, here's the visitor center and the cemetery. McClernand is in that set of clearings right before you get to that high rise before Grant's last stand. That's where his 2 divisions are camped. Pope gets on boats at New Madrid and comes up the Mississippi, up the Ohio, up the Tennessee, to Hamburg Landing, which is 4 miles south. And Pope has the advantage. There's a big creek in between those, in between him and Buell, that he doesn't have to cross. So basically, these guys are camped where they can find dry, flat ground, but it isn't like a necessarily carnage. So, for those who remember, I think the Hornet's Nest is probably somewhere in here. Heavy fighting. Here's Shiloh Church, where there was a bunch of heavy fighting. So this is, down here, is really before the Confederates and the Federals made contact. So they're camping on that ground where there's not the smell of dead bodies. After the Hornet's Nest, the Federals retreat to the last line of defense, so there's not a lot of dead bodies in here. So this is where McClernand's camping. And Pope is down here, separated by a creek. Now, could Beauregard have attacked Pope? Did he have an opportunity there? Pope had, 30,000 troops. Beauregard has 57,000 or so in Corinth. Could Beauregard have attacked Pope in that advanced position? Is that a missed opportunity? Well, maybe, maybe not. Beauregard was pretty tore up as well after Corinth. So Halleck says on May 4th, after getting there, April 7th, he says on May 4th, I leave here, Pittsburgh Landing, tomorrow morning. Our army will be in Corinth before tomorrow night. He sends this wire to the War Department. Do you think he would take back those words if he probably could? Yeah, probably. We're going to find out it didn't work out. So 40,000 Confederates can move up to Pittsburgh Landing on a single road in 2-3 days. 125,000 really Union troops can't. Plus full spring rains. So you start to see the rains during and after Shiloh. It is raining cats and dogs now. And a Union engineer says, but a slight conception of the amount of work performed can be entertained. And we'll see about that. So we always say, oh, Halleck took forever. He was slow. He entrenched. You're going to see it's terrain and weather that stop Halleck from going where he needs to go. And he had very different weather than Beauregard and Johnston had going up to Pittsburgh Landing. Halleck had much tougher weather coming south to Corinth. So George Thomas is going to follow the Confederate attack route in reverse. Buell has to bridge Lick Creek and corduroy the roads. You'll see that Pope doesn't have to bridge the creek because the boats took him south of the creek, so he doesn't have to build a bridge. But Pope's got to build a bridge because the troops can get across Lick Creek, but the wagons can't, the artillery can't, the supplies can't. So he's got to bridge that creek. And then McClernand is going to, I say Buell, I think McClernand actually was supposed to follow Thomas eventually here. So here's the jumping off, right? Pope takes off on the 27th. He's 4 miles ahead and he doesn't have to bridge that creek. Buell takes off on the 28th and Buell's going to go down the middle. Thomas takes off on the 29th and Thomas has got the right flank, or to the left as we see it here. So George Thomas has the easiest route. McClernand's going to follow along. But based on what you know about George Thomas, he's got the easiest route, but will he get there quickly? What was his nickname? Anybody remember? Slow Trot Thomas. Well, he's going to prove why he got that nickname, right?
Well, that actually had to do with how he trained people, in the cavalry.
Yeah.
How he would pace the horses rather than wearing them out.
Yeah. But it also had to do with Grant's perception of how he moved his troops. So that kind of reinforced it, right? So Pope advances the 27th. Buell's supposed to advance the 28th. Thomas is supposed to advance the 29th. It's dictated by terrain difficulties. So Pope has the toughest terrain, the furthest east toward the river. You have bigger ravines, you have bigger gullies. Buell, the next day, kind of down the middle, not as difficult, but he's got to bridge that creek. Thomas, the 29th, after everybody, he's got the easiest terrain, furthest from the river, more rolling versus severe terrain. And immediately they start running into small skirmishes of Confederate troops because Beauregard is fighting a classic delay. So we'll talk about each of these in turn. So Pope's got the toughest terrain of the three armies, which are really corps type formations. So on the 29th, he encounters Patton Anderson's brigade at Monterey. On the 30th, he gets to Chambers Creek, 8 miles outside of Corinth, and he has an uncontested crossing of Chambers Creek. On May 4th, he attempts to cross 7 Mile Creek. How far away from Corinth do you think 7 Mile Creek might be? 7 miles, right? So and then the narrative says, and then it began to rain. So other than reconnaissance, Pope is going to sit here. So the narrative you've been fed is that Halleck moves along every day, maybe a mile or two, stops in the trenches. The truth is, Pope moved 18 miles in 2 days and gets to 7 miles outside of Corinth. But three things stop him. So one is the rain. Two, Marmaduke's brigade picks some really good terrain to defend at. And three, Buell's way behind him because he has to bridge Lick Creek, and Thomas is way behind that because he's Thomas. So Pope's in kind of an advanced position right here. So he was up here, and he's moved 18 miles in 2 days, which is not horrible for that terrain. But then he stopped by 7 Mile Creek, rain, and a brigade-sized formation. And he's far out in the front. And Halleck's getting nervous because his elements of his army are getting separated. Let's talk a little bit about John Sappington Marmaduke, who will figure prominently in this. He was born in Saline County, Missouri. His father was governor of Missouri. He's a nephew of Claiborne Fox Jackson. Went to Yale for 2 years, went to Harvard 1 year, graduated from the military academy. He was in the 2nd U.S. Cavalry under Albert Sidney Johnston. Now, who was Albert Sidney Johnston's XO in the 2nd U.S. Cavalry? Anybody remember? Obscure figure from Confederate history named Robert E. Lee. He was a slaveholder. He was wounded at Shiloh. He was a part of Hardee's staff. Division commander in Price's raid, which we've talked about when we talked about Pilot Knob, and he was the governor of Missouri on the New Missouri platform. Joe Shelby campaigned for him. He died in office in year 3 of his term of pneumonia. But there are a lot of Missourians here in this, as well as were at Shiloh. So Buell's got to bridge Lick Creek. He's going to take the road to Monterey, basically this route in reverse that Beauregard and Johnston took to get to Shiloh. Scheduled to advance April 28th, actually steps off May 2nd. makes it to Chambers Creek on May 4th and sits there for 4 days, and then on May 8th he crosses Chambers Creek. So he's basically on May 8th, he's right in here. So he's not too super far from supporting distance from Pope. Thomas has the easiest terrain of the three. Supposed to advance to 29th, finally gets moving May 4th. He has no natural flank to his right, so he puts William Tecumseh Sherman there. How happy do you think William Tecumseh Sherman was to be on the far right side of that whole thing? So he's grumbling the whole time. He's upset. Doesn't like being there. Thomas makes it to the state line by May 8th with almost no real difficulty, no real contact. Ironically, occupies a piece of ground called Pea Ridge. So they're here now. They're kind of in supporting distance of each other. Here's a second opportunity for Beauregard to attack one of the other halves of Halleck's army because, you know, Corinth is right here. So he can come and hit Thomas. He could come out and hit Pope, except he's got the same terrain and weather problems that the Federals have. So this idea I want to dispel, though, oh, we go a mile and we dig trenches. This is what I was always told. Timothy Smith dispels that notion. They did entrench when they stopped, but again, you know, Pope moved 18 miles in a couple days. Buell moved fairly quick. Thomas not so much, but they were stopped by terrain. They were stopped by 7 Mile Creek, and heavier and heavier contact with the Confederates.
Greg,
Yeah.
where is Halleck?
Halleck is in the middle of it, probably co-located with Buell, I would think, but he's moving him. He's there. He's not back at Pittsburgh Landing. I mean, he's forward deployed with the Army.
With one of the arms?
Yeah, and he's moving back and forth to the extent he can, but movement between these three wings of the Army is not easy. The roads don't, I mean, if the roads today run kind of like they went then, right? So if you're with Buell and you want to get to Thomas, you got to come back up to Mickey's and go over and come down. I mean, it's not easy to get around.
How much are they communicating with each other?
I mean, there's runners going back and forth every day.
No telegraph, just
Yeah,
Right.
Halleck knows where the wings of his army are, and he knows he's exposed, and he knows he's vulnerable. And Beauregard knows where he is, but Beauregard can't do anything about it. So what do? Do I go out of my trenches at Corinth and go try to fight these guys? Now, Halleck thought Beauregard had more troops than he had. Beauregard, I've got a slide here. I think he's got around 45,000 troops. We'll see if I remember that right. But Halleck thinks he's got more like 60, but Halleck knows he's got Beauregard outnumbered. And Beauregard knows he's outnumbered. So Beauregard knows the best I can do is slow him down. So he's going to. Now, it's April. Let's back up and see, when do these guys get here? Yeah, so May 8th, they're finally in position. March 23rd, Albert Sidney Johnston orders Earl Van Dorn to come to Corinth. Well, where's Earl Van Dorn on March 23rd? He's at Pea Ridge, right? Getting ready to fight a battle he doesn't need to fight. From the perspective of the Missouri troops, they won that battle. They're not very happy with Van Dorn. April 8th, they commissioned Price as a major general in the Confederate Army. 8,000 Missouri soldiers plus Van Dorn's troops cross the Mississippi near Memphis, arrive at Corinth on April 24th. So again, if Pope had been at Memphis, he could have stopped those troops from crossing. So Earl Van Dorn's got 20,000. Braxton Bragg's got 50,000 total in the Army of the Mississippi, and they're all together under Beauregard. So here it is, 70,000 troops that he has initially. On paper, we'll soon see he had far less people than that available to fight. So the Army of the Mississippi contains the survivors of Shiloh, plus anything else they can scrape up throughout the South. The majority of these troops of the Army of Mississippi later on will form the nucleus of the garrison at Vicksburg. So these guys did not have a great time of things, just, to be honest. So Sterling Price comes into Corinth and wins friends and influences people. He says, well, these things, meaning the fortifications at Corinth, may be very fine. I never saw anything of the kind but once, and then I took them. Well, what's he referring to there? Lexington. He's like, yeah, you know, I've seen earthworks like this, and I took them, and so, like, wow, thank you for that vote of confidence there, Sterling Price. That's great. This is like, we've been working on this for 2 months before you decided to get here, but, so, and then on April 30th, Van Dorn arrives with the remainder of the Army of the West. So now it's 70,000 versus 120,000. There's a problem, though. Water system isn't designed for 70,000 soldiers. It's designed for the people of the city of Corinth, which is, I don't know, 2,000-3,000 people. So 25,000 of his soldiers get sick. He's got 45,000 effectives. As many Confederates would die of disease at Corinth as died of battle at Shiloh. Yeah. Measles, mumps, and typhoid were the big three killers. Now, Halleck knows this. This is going to play into his decision cycle later. So Beauregard, well, I don't know whose quote this is, but there's a quote from someone there. There are very few whose health is not affected by the pestilential air, unwholesome water of that swamp-surrounded village, meaning Corinth. And another guy writes home, I like this soldiering. I'd like it a good deal better if I could get some good water to drink. The water here is cold but awful muddy and full of lime and very injurious to most of the men. Now, during this time, New Orleans is captured, Norfolk's captured. They're still in communication with railroads and telegraph with the South. And 12-month men that have signed up get told, nope, you're staying for 3 years. So congratulations. So, oh, and by the way, did you hear Sterling Price was cracking on our fortifications? I mean, what is going on here, right? So he has a hard time getting clothing. He has a hard time getting forage. He puts his troops on reduced rations. Now, he's got railroad connections to the South, but the South doesn't have a ton to send him. And he's got a high amount of deserters, so about 1 out of 10 men is deployed in the rear to shoot them if they ran. Well, that sounds like the Soviet Union in World War II, doesn't it? You know, so here's his dispositions. Here's kind of your federal lines outside here. So you've got Breckinridge, Polk, Bragg, Hardy. Well, gee, that sounds like the cast of characters from Shiloh, doesn't it? And then you got Van Dorn here on the right. This will become important here in a second. So what I'm going to do, I'm Beauregard. I'm going to attack Pope. I'm going to do what Greg suggested. I'm going to attack Pope once he gets over that creek. He's exposed. I can get him. So I'm going to schedule this for May 9th. I'm going to have 2 of Bragg's divisions demonstrate in front of Pope. I'm going to have Van Dorn and Sterling Price swing around, hit his exposed left flank. But instead of his whole corps, Pope only crossed the creek with 1 brigade. It's probably good for Beauregard that Pope only had 1 brigade south of the creek, because we'll find out later, Bragg couldn't even handle that 1 brigade, and Van Dorn gets lost. So here's the plan. These 2 divisions are going to hit Pope. Van Dorn with basically 3 divisions is going to swing around, hit Pope's flank. That's the plan.
Where's Pope?
Right in here. This is kind of the left flank of the Federal Army. And this is the part that's exposed across the creek. This is like 1 brigade across 7 Mile Creek here. And this is Pope's left flank. This is the plan. So 1 brigade is south of the creek, one of Pope's brigades, and they don't have any rations. They went across the creek and they ate all their food, and they didn't have any more food. Brigade commander's ill, so he turns command over to the next colonel, one of the regimental colonels. They're like, well, we're going to get relieved the next morning, so no one's going to attack us here. It's raining, whatever. So the next morning, Bragg's 2 divisions slam into this brigade. A 2nd brigade under Pope crosses the creek to reinforce it. They hold their own against 2 Confederate divisions until dark, and then they retreat back across the creek, and the Confederates burn the bridge. So 2 brigades against 2 divisions, one of which had not had anything to eat in a while, who was missing their brigade commander. Not too shabby. So Pope wants to send his whole corps out. He's like, my 2 brigades, they smacked down 2 divisions. Let's go get them. And Halleck says, I don't want you to bring on a larger engagement. Well, doesn't that sound exactly like the orders he gave Ulysses S. Grant at Shiloh? Don't do anything, Pope later says, my whole corps was greatly dissatisfied with the outcome, which is an understatement. They lost 16 killed, 157 wounded or captured. The Confederates had 119 casualties. Today we know that as the Battle of Farmington. Well, what about Van Dorn, right? He was supposed to hit their left flank. Well, he says natural obstructions, swamps, thickets, ravines, etc., prevented my right flank from reaching the Hamburg Road in time to cut off the enemy's retreat, although every effort was made. Okay, Van Dorn, cool. Every effort. This would become a pattern with him. And I love the passive verb use. Every effort was made. Okay, well, who made the effort, Van Dorn? Because I didn't see it.
Would he have just done that on his own, or would you, somebody told him not to do that?
Not to do what? Not to do anything?
Yeah.
I think he got lost. I mean, if the terrain was rough, and I don't think he knew the terrain, and I think he had a hard, by the time he got it together, the battle was over with Pope's brigade that was across the creek, and he didn't see the point. And he made the decision to go back. Might have been the right decision, but he did not execute his orders. So, however, after the fight on May 9th, Halleck seemed to lose some of his nerve, and so on May 2nd, he says to Edwin Stanton, "We expect a terrible battle, but our men will fight well, and all are determined to have a victory." Then on the 13th, he says, "We're gradually advancing on Corinth, but as the enemy is entrenched, and his number equal to, if not superior to ours," 70,000 versus 120,000, right? 25,000 of those 70 are sick. "It's necessary to move with great caution." Now, first he said, "We'll be there tomorrow night," right? Anyway, so now starts the daily entrenchments of moving forward. But this doesn't happen until they're within, earshot of the city of Corinth. So after Farmington, they won't do anything for 7 days. Well, part of that is logistics, right? They're 15 miles from the Tennessee River. Now, a round trip of a wagon takes 2 days. A day to get from the landings to where they are, a day to get back. They have a pretty good setup. Thomas is supplied from Crump's Landing. Buell and McLaren are supplied from Pittsburgh Landing, and Pope from Hamburg Landing. So they've got, they've got 3 different steamboat landings, but it's the roads getting that last 15 miles where wagons are miring up to the hubs, And Beauregard, even though he doesn't have a ton of supplies, he has a secure rail line on the Mobile and Ohio Railroad to get supplies, so the logistics start to equalize. So what does Halleck do? He takes 2.5 weeks to pull Buell and Thomas up alongside Pope. He bans all non-combatants from the Army. He sends the war correspondents back to Pittsburgh Landing, where you can read about what we're doing on a bulletin board. Why? Because the war correspondents were saying, "This guy ain't doing nothing. This guy is dragging his feet." Well, my solution, I'm going to ban the reporters. Well, you think this endeared the reporters to him, and you think him later, because they're all starting to slam him in their newspaper articles. This guy, he's entrenching every day, which is true, but he didn't start that until he got about 7 miles outside of Corinth. So they are letting him go. Probably did not win him friends in the press. So May 21st, Beauregard has a do-over. I'm going to again flank to the right, but now the whole army is going to attack. I'm going to try to impact Halleck psychologically. That one attack stopped him for 7 days. Maybe I can really get in this guy's head. So attack in echelon means you attack, then you wait 15 minutes and you attack, right? So if I attack and you got to have reinforcements to come reinforce me, maybe now this guy's attack takes off. He'll hit a spot that's weak. And Van Dorn's going to go around to the right again. The same guy who screwed it up to begin with, right? We're going to let him do the same plan. He couldn't do it the first time. So Hardee says at 2:30 in the morning, the road's blocked up with troops, wagons, and artillery. Breckinridge has got to adjust his lines with Pope. And Van Dorn, at 8 a.m. for you civilians, says, "I've been delayed by bad management and stupidity of officers." Now again, that's winning friends and influencing people. I'm going to blame my officers, right? Unexpected defiles, which means big swales. Unexpected. So you didn't recon anything, right? Unexpected. And I am sick with disappointment and chagrin, but I will push the enemy when I do reach our position. I feel like a wolf and will fight Pope like one. Have patience with me. You will hear my guns soon. It doesn't sound like he feels like a wolf to me. I'll fight like a wolf, but I'm going to give you 50 excuses why I'm not going to fight like a wolf, right? So my operating thesis here is that Van Dorn should have been hanged. I'm not a big Van Dorn fan. Now at 1200, he says that at 8 o'clock, at 1200, which is noon for you civilians, it pains me to say that I have, after consultation with Generals Hardee and Price, in other words, let me blame those guys, determined to return to my entrenchments without orders, without, any permission, I have found unexpected difficulties. I mean, I had no idea that there were hills and valleys and creeks out here. I thought we were fighting on a pool table, you know? And I've been delayed until this hour and not yet in position. It's too late. It's noon, right? It's too late to begin a general engagement. You've got 6-7 hours of daylight left, but okay. And I cannot wait to hear from you to get orders, because if I get orders from you telling me to attack, I'm going to have to attack, and I really don't want to. So I have therefore determined to act myself in return. I will explain more fully when I see you, which I hope is never, because I know I'm going to get it, right? But I blame Beauregard for this. Entrusted the same movement to the general who failed him on May 9th. No communications linked to Van Dorn, not sending anybody to ensure that Van Dorn obeyed his officers. But the threat of this attack slowed the Federals down for another week. So I'm going to tell you, I can't find too many examples of Van Dorn ever following orders, including the order to get to Corinth in the first place. He gets the order to go to Corinth, and he decides, I'm going to go ahead and fight at Pea Ridge and delay myself, right? I don't have much good to say about Van Dorn. So Halleck gets reinforcements in the person of a guy with the improbable name, Union Commander Jefferson C. Davis. And now he's got all three wings online, so he orders a general advance on May 28th, and he gets within siege gun range of Corinth. He has siege guns that he brings overland from the Tennessee River. He sends a cavalry brigade 22 miles south to break the railroad line, which they break, but they get it repaired. And then he pauses. My plan is now I'm going to pound Corinth into submission. Now, if I'm a Federal soldier, I like this plan. I don't want to assault those trenches. So I'll give Halleck credit where credit's due. I think he did care about the lives of his men. Why? When I can just bring up guns and pound them into submission. Well, do you know anyone else who had a similar plan? I've got these guys outnumbered, even though I don't really believe it. They've got entrenchments. I'm going to pause and bring up my siege guns and pound them into submission. Who else had that plan? I know you know. I can see it. Yeah, McClellan on the Peninsula Campaign, right? So same mindset, that Napoleonic mindset. But if I was a private in the whatever, Indiana infantry, I'd be like, yeah, let's wait. Let's let the guns do the job, right? I don't feel like attacking those entrenchments. So Beauregard's got three options. He can leave the entrenchments and attack, which has failed twice already, and there's a big numbers disparity. He can stay, and he knows there's a numbers disparity. He can stay in the trenches and hope to defeat a Federal attack. They now have siege guns. Or he can evacuate. So what does Beauregard decide to do? Let's get out. I don't know what else he could have done. So here's his reality. He was exiled out west in the first place by Jefferson Davis. They had a bad relationship. He sends a letter to the Confederate War Department that General Lee gets. I deem it advisable to lay before the department my reasons for still holding this position against a much stronger force of the enemy in my front, even at the risk of a defeat, instead of retiring into the interior of the country. So he's telling them why I think I should stay. But then he says, this is a bluff, right? He's trying to slough off responsibility and get permission to withdraw and not take it on himself. And he says, so here's the line of retreat I would take if I had to retreat. And Lee says, yeah, if you have to retreat, that's a good line of retreat. Beauregard interprets that as Richmond says I can retreat. Lee never said that, but that Richmond will use that letter. So he holds a council of war with Polk, Bragg, Hardee, Breckinridge, Van Dorn, and Price. He issues the orders to evacuate. And Lee says, yeah, if you got to retreat, I guess that's the best way to go. So south then, right? That's where you're going to go? Okay. Yeah, that's probably good to me instead of retreating north, yeah. So Lee had no real idea what the terrain looked like down there, so he's like, sure, man, I got things to do. So his plan is for the baggage and the trains to leave by noon on the 28th, begin evacuation at dark on May 28th, 1 brigade per corps manning the trenches to leave at 3 a.m. on the 29th, complete evacuation by daybreak, go down to Baldwin and Guntown. So here's his plan. He's got an orderly plan. He's got orderly lines of march to come down here to Baldwin to retreat south. That's his plan. What's his reality? Well, the prospect of the railroad is not encouraging. Things move very slowly. A want of management with the cars as well as sick. We can't evacuate by dawn May 29th without abandoning arms, ammunition, baggage, which we cannot afford to lose. That's Bragg to Beauregard. They don't have enough railroad cars, so they adjust the timetable by 1 day. Right now, we're gonna talk about what Halleck saw. So Bragg orders the personal baggage burned. He orders guards to shoot any looters. The last trains come out of Corinth at 4:30 in the morning on May 30th, and the last troops march south before first light, and they eventually rally at Tupelo. Beauregard had sent fake deserters with tales of, oh yeah, we're being reinforced. Halleck, of course, interprets the noise of the train to mean, oh, they're being reinforced. And John Pope says, I have no doubt from all appearances that I will be attacked in heavy force at daylight. Well, no. Here's what Grant says, right, in his memoirs. Later, probably on the 28th of May, General Logan, whose command was then on the Mobile and Ohio Railroad, said to me that the enemy had been evacuating for several days, and if said aloud, he could go into Corinth with his brigade. This is after the fact in, 1875, 1880, when he wrote these memoirs. Trains of cars were heard coming in and going out of Corinth constantly. Some of the men who had engaged in various capacities on railroads before the war claimed that they could tell by putting their ears to the rail not only which way the trains were moving, but which were loaded and which were empty. Yeah, I think that's a load of crap. But anybody remember from the Springfield trip encountering General Logan? Anybody remember that was on that trip? When we went to the Illinois Military Museum, they had his coat there. And his swords and his swagger stick. They also have, wasn't on display, but they also have Santa Anna's wooden leg. And they have these rotating displays, so I don't remember seeing that, but on occasion, they'll put Santa Anna's wooden leg out at that. So, I mean, they have some of the craziest stuff. But yeah, John Logan would go on to be on the march to Atlanta and a pretty prominent guy. So Halleck takes Corinth, and he orders most of the troops out of Corinth. The misconception is that, Halleck went in and all his people died from bad diseases. No, Halleck knew that the Confederates were dying from disease, so he gets them out. It was Beauregard's army, not Halleck's, that suffered the most from disease. I mean, Halleck seemed to genuinely cared about his men. I'll give him that. So here's the consequences. East to west rail movement is done. So you got to go through Corinth. Beauregard is even more of a pariah, who's replaced by Bragg, which is probably the best thing that could have happened to the Federal cause. And this made Halleck's reputation, which is the best thing that could have ever happened to the Confederate war effort, although they kicked him upstairs where he couldn't do any problem, and it restored Grant to command. Beauregard's sick, has a throat infection, so he kind of goes AWOL, actually, and Davis removes him from command. Bragg makes a plan to invade Kentucky, which will culminate in Perryville. But before that, you got to do Iuka, you got to do Second Battle of Corinth, and all those things. So what does Halleck do? Thomas returns to division command. Buell and 4 divisions go to Chattanooga. He splits everyone up all over the place. Sherman promoted to corps command, and then he takes 3 divisions to Memphis, which is what Pope wanted to do. Violates the principle of mass. Grant's returned to command the department. Of those 125,000 troops, he can keep 80,000 of them. Edward Ord takes command of the Army of the Tennessee. Rosecrans takes command of the Army of the Ohio. And that's the consequences of this. So, we'll talk about the principles of war. Who had a good principle of war of objective? Well, both. It was simple. Federals had to take Corinth. Bad guys, Confederates, I call them the bad guys, sorry, had to keep Corinth. There's my bias, I'm sorry. Offensive, seize, retain, and exploit the initiative. Yes, Halleck kept the initiative. He kept the pressure on. Beauregard never had the initiative. Mass. Mass the effects of overwhelming combat power at the decisive place and time. Well, you can argue that the Federals never really massed because they advanced very piecemeal, but eventually they got 125,000 troops in the right place at the right time. Confederates could never mass enough troops to hold them back. Economy of force. Employ all combat power available. Allocate minimum essential combat power to secondary efforts. No, Halleck flooded the place with Union troops. He did not have economy of force. Maneuver. Place the enemy in a position of disadvantage through the flexible application of combat power. Halleck just went straight forward. There was no real maneuver to it. Unity of command for every objective. Seek unity of command and unity of effort. Okay, my check marks have gone off here, but yeah, both of them had unity of command. There was a clear commander for both. Never permit the enemy to acquire unexpected advantage. I mean, the Federals were surprised a couple times, so they really didn't have that security. The Confederates did because they had interior lines. Surprise, there was no surprise. Everybody knew what everybody was doing the whole time. And then simplicity, clear, uncomplicated plans and concise orders to ensure thorough understanding. I guess they were equally simple. We're going to attack you and drive you out of Corinth. We're going to stop you from doing it. Although Halleck's reorganization plan, I think, was a little complex. So, I mean, in the end, even though I would say the Confederates overall did a better job of applying the principles of war, the mass of the Federal Army is what really won out. So, oops, let me go back. Sets up for Bragg's invasion of the North at Perryville. Sets up for Van Dorn's attack on Corinth. Sets up for Grant's Vicksburg campaign. So here's our takeaways. It took Albert Sidney Johnston 3 days to move from Corinth to Shiloh in early April. It took Halleck a month to do the same in reverse in May. Beauregard did a decent job of delaying a much stronger force for 30 days. Van Dorn utterly failed in his mission twice and should have been shot. Should have been tortured before he was shot, but it's a fallacy to believe that Halleck's advance went a mile or two a day and entrenched each day. He didn't entrench until he made heavy contact. It was the terrain and the weather that slowed him down. It's a fallacy to believe that Halleck's army was crippled by sickness after taking Corinth. What really paralyzed them was the splitting up of the army, but they had to do it. I mean, you can't feed and you can't get water to that army all in Corinth. Beauregard's army suffered more from sickness than Halleck's. So here's my main reference. There's others I used, but so what are your questions? Some of y'all asked them during, so that's fine. But
when the second time that Van Dorn was supposed to flank, did the other units do their part? Did the other units try to attack the honor echelon?
They tried, but the terrain was terrible.
Didn't get anywhere.
They didn't get anywhere. They were tangled up, like you heard. They were sending messages back and forth. Well, you're in my sector, you know. Your peanut butter's in my chocolate, right? And so it was a mess. And I don't think Beauregard helped things. I think he kind of like you saw at Fort Donelson when they're trying to break out. Yeah, here's kind of our vague plan, but no one coordinated anything. I don't think Beauregard supervised that very well. But they did try. And it held up Halleck for another week. So they were in his head. But they delayed him as long as they could, probably longer than they had a right to, because it's Henry Halleck.
So it sounds like they were in a lot of swamp areas. So what happened with soldiers that got sick? Or I mean, was that something that was a really big drag on both sides, or on one side?
On the Confederate side, much more than on the Federal side. So the Confederates had a rail line where they could evacuate sick people. And the Federals had, they would put them in a wagon, take them back to one of those 3 landings on the Tennessee River, take them by boat, probably, who knows, maybe back to Cairo. I'm not exactly sure, but so they had methods for evacuating their sick soldiers, for sure. So, okay, that's it for me. Thank you very much.